Good morning. For those who were not here yesterday, my name is Blas Perez Enriquez. I direct the Center for Environmental Public Policy here at Berkeley. Welcome you all. And today we have our panel that is bringing some lessons from other countries, and most of the panelists travel from far away. And so we thank them for that. London, France. And also I have special thanks for someone who's actually spending her birthday speaking with us. So Eda, happy birthday. Well, this panel will discuss economic impacts of high-speed rail, lessons for California. This panel will explore the economic impacts of high-speed rail projects abroad, and we'll look at lessons for California to maximize the economic benefits of high-speed rail for our state. Our moderator is Schera Zekri-Chevallet. She's Director of Business Development for SNCF France. She's been in the French Railway Corporation for 15 years. She develops non-European markets, and she's been involved in projects in Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and until recently in Florida. I guess no longer, but she was working there. So welcome. Thank you, Shera.
Thank you, Blas. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning. And I would like to thank Blas and his team for the organization of this conference, which is, I think, perfectly orchestrated since yesterday. So thank you to all of you. Our panel this morning will explore the economic impacts of high-speed rail abroad and how California can learn on the lessons that we've learned there. I think everybody has a question, which is it worth spending so much money in a high-speed rail project, and what kind of return should we expect from it? Are we able to think about long-term benefits of a high-speed rail project, knowing that most of our, in today's world, most of the people are really short-minded and not necessarily looking at long-term. Yesterday, during our first conference day, we spent time on smart growth, sustainability, urbanism, and transportation policy. Looking at the economic impacts of high-speed rail today, we'll definitely reiterate the fact that high-speed rail is only a tool in a toolbox to address or accommodate a growing population and expanded mobility needs. I would say that it's because there is growth and the relevant market condition that high-speed rail could be used to support the economic development and is definitely a complementary mode to address the rising demand in transportation needs for all the reasons we've seen yesterday. So I hope you were here yesterday. For the ones who were not here, you probably going to have today, I think, a drive with all the presentation that we had yesterday. Now I would like to welcome our panelists today and thank you for their presence this morning. As Blas said, 3 of them are coming from Europe to share their experience with us. And we will be talking about high-speed rail projects in France, in the UK, and in Germany. The last panelist is from Berkeley. He's the co-author of a paper on California high-speed rail and economic development. This paper looks at the net economic development impacts of high-speed rail and the redistribution of growth and investment for California, making a comparison with the Shinkansen example in Japan. Let's start with Yves Crozet. Yves Crozet is professor at the Institute of Transport Economics at the University of Lyon in France. He's the member of the Institute of Transport Economics and was head of this institute from 1997 to 2007. He's the member of the Administrative Council of RFF. RFF is the infrastructure manager of the French railways. He's the General Secretary of the World Conference on Transportation Research Society and chairman of the French Observatory for Energy, Environment and Transport. Yves' presentation will focus on high-speed rail and interurban mobility and raise the question of who are the winners. Yves, the floor is yours. Just maybe one remark before we start. You have in front of you small pencil and blank cards, and these are for questions, so don't hesitate to write down your questions, and they will pass on to me for the end of the presentations.
Thank you, Schera. Good morning, everybody. Yes, the question about the winners and the objective about the losers is very important. Do we have winners, and who are the winners? My presentation will be divided into two parts. Just I will come back to a well-known German formula, as happy as God in France. So I can change as happy as high-speed rail in France. I'm not sure that it's true, but it's an hypothesis. And then we will focus about the land use issue and time management issue. Just some words about the French model of high-speed rail, model into brackets, because when you explain to a Frenchie that it could be a model, immediately we think to Napoleon, and it's not very, very careful. So, model into brackets, and the very key role of geography and urban hierarchy. And then I will come back to my job as an economist about cost-benefit analysis and ex post and ex ante evaluation of high-speed rail. So as presented yesterday, what is important to understand the French model is that we have one big city, Paris, 1/5 of the total population of France, and this is the reason, the main reason of the success. Between Lyon and Paris, it's almost 500 kilometers, and almost a desert between the two. I hope that nobody is coming from Burgundy here. So it's clear that you can have the maximum speed on more than 400 kilometers, and then you have a very big gain. So the French model is valid only for this kind of geography. We will see that in Germany, it's not the same model, it's not the same thing, and even in Japan, it's not exactly the same. So the model is optimal when you have the good mix between distance, between speed, between the size of cities, and so on. So we develop all the new line. We will see just the map, already presented yesterday by Michel Leboeuf. And it's clear that we have the high speed only between Lyon-Paris and Lyon-Marseille, and you have Paris-Lille and London, and then a little part of high-speed track between Paris and Tours. And due to that, less than 2,000 kilometers of the new high-speed rail, it's possible to join more than 200 train stations. Only 25 stations on high-speed tracks, but more than 200 stations in France and more than 50 stations in Germany, in Belgium, in Great Britain, and so on. So the first explanation of the success is the combination between the old part of the network and the new part of the network. And if we try to compare with California, it is exactly almost the same scale. It's clear that between San Francisco and San Diego, you have 800 kilometers, exactly the same than in between Paris and Marseille. And we can compare the situation, and obviously you have some elements in your geography close to the French model. If now I come to the cost-benefit analysis, it's necessary to take time to explain that. This is the economic profitability. This is not the financial profitability. That is to say, it's before the payments of rate of interest. And we compare the cost-benefit analysis ex ante before the building and the ex post profitability calculation only on a 20 years period. It's clear that the life cycle of high-speed train is more than 20 years. That is to say that if we calculated on 30 years, on 40 years, the profitability will be higher. And if you compare the two, you obtain for the first line, opened in 1981, between Paris and Lyon, very good profitability and almost the same ex ante and ex post assessment. It was not the same, for instance, for Paris-Lille. Big difference. A big difference because Paris-Lille, it's not exactly the good destination because it's not only 1 hour between Paris and Lille. So the TGV is in competition with car mobility. So it is the explanation of that. Between the north-south connection, it's between close to Paris, between the north and the south of Paris. Lyon bypass, it is the same. And you observe that the more you enlarge a network, the more you enlarge the difference between ex-ante and ex-post profitability. That is to say that there is an optimal size of the network, and the more we create new line, the more you reduce profitability. So this is the economic profitability. And if now we compare with socio-economic profitability, we still remove the issue of financial payments, that is to say interest, but we add as a profitability the social, the external benefits. And obviously we remove the external cost. External benefits, it's mainly time gains. In that case, if we look at the first line between Paris and Lyon, the socio-economic profitability was very high, almost 30%. And the ex-post calculation has not been done, but it's close to 30%. And if we compare with the other lines, the ex-ante profitability is very high, more than 10 than 15%. But the ex-post profitability is not so good, especially for Paris-Lille and even for the Mediterranean. This result explains that the main winners of the system are the users. Don't look at some people living close to the station. The main winners are the users. So the winners are mainly the actors of high-speed rail system, even if very often people speak about the winners outside from the high-speed rail system. No, the winners are mainly insiders, inside the high-speed rail system. The first winners are the users, because the surplus, because of time gains, is very, very high. And this very important, this big size of time gains justify public subsidies for the system. And the second category of winners are the railways operator, railway company, and RFF, because high-speed rail is profitable for SNCF and profitable for RFF. But we are also some losers. The motorways company, because we have toll motorway company. Airports are our loser. For instance, in 2007, when we opened the line between Paris and Strasbourg, the traffic in the airport was divided by 2 in Strasbourg. So 50% less traffic in Strasbourg, and it is still the case today. And don't forget that we have the cost of public funds. And if we launch new lines where you have not a lot of traffic like on between Paris and Lyon, it's clear that the opportunity cost of public funds, it's an issue. So now we know the winners, and we have to go more in detail about local impacts and time management. Firstly, if we look at the local impacts of high-speed rail, the impacts are not as high as currently indicated. But it's clear that high-speed rail is a big opportunity for local decision makers, and also a big opportunity for us, for me as a user, because it's a wonderful tool to manage the scarcest resource, that is to say, our time budget. National economic impacts, first it's important to recall that high-speed rail is neither a horn of plenty nor a magic wand. That is to say, the high-speed rail is strengthening the gravity rationally. The result is more polarization and not an equalization of the geography in the country. The high-speed rail does not change the hierarchy of the relative attractiveness of cities. Paris remains a big city, and Lyon is a medium city, and Strasbourg is a small city. But it's clear that a city not connected to high-speed rail becomes a relative loser. And then the result is that all the local politicians want today to have the high-speed rail connection. As mentioned by Michel Valrave, the engineer in charge of launching the first line, it was very difficult to launch the first one, and it is very difficult to stop before the last one, not necessary. And if here you have the map of all the project. In white, you have the line already open, and in red or purple, you have all the new line, all the projected, more than 2,000 kilometers more within 2020. Fortunately, we have an economic crisis, and we have some financial trouble, and it will be very difficult to launch all this line, fortunately. So about the local economic impacts, what we observe, what my colleague from, for instance, University of France observed, we have no major and systematic impacts on the local economy, neither on the number of jobs at the regional level, nor on the number of inhabitants, not an all of plenty. The local economic dynamics is the same before and after the high-speed rail, whatever the activity, industry, services, and even the services to firms. No major and systematic impact on land price. Even if everybody in France thinks that there is an impact, there is no impact. Higher price of land, we have only concentrated just close to the train station, but no impact at 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers of the station. And very often, the new jobs close to the station are the result of a transfer from another part of the city. So no big increase of the number of jobs. So then the main lessons of the high-speed rail in France is don't make the confusion between consumer surplus and GDP growth. It's very often the case in France that because we increase the consumer surplus, some people say, from the consumer surplus, you have automatically GDP growth. It's not the case, because very often the consumer surplus is coming from another part of the economy. The demand of speed is the consequence of economic growth and not the cause. That is to say, it's not because we have high-speed rail that we have economic growth, but it's because we have economic growth that we need high-speed rail. Because the high-speed rail is clearly a source of smart growth, not the source of growth, but the source of smart growth, especially for collective land use and individual time management. About collective land use and land use pattern, what happens around the high-speed rail station? When they are well located, it's important to underline that, because you can have some stupid station in the middle of nowhere. First, we have a reorganization of the local public transit system, and it's very important for local politicians to understand that when you open a new high-speed rail, you have to change all the local transit system. You have really a new dynamism in inhabitants, jobs, shops, just around the station, and so it's clear that HSR is a leverage for the local decision makers to foster density and sustainable city. But it's not the case if the station is in the middle of nowhere. So if we close the presentation with perhaps the main effect for the users is about the improvement of time management. So it's clear that for everybody, time is today the scarcest resource. It's very simple. It's because during the last century, between 100 years, in France, our life expectancy was multiplied by 1.4. And our revenue, our income was multiplied by 10. So we have more and more money and just a little more time. For that reason, we need to improve our time management, and we need with a more intensive way of manage our time. And it is the main explanation of the success of high-speed rail. It is the key to another way of life, cooler and nevertheless more intensive. So my conclusion is, perhaps you don't know if you are not from France, the main advertising of SNCF in France was about TGV, about high-speed rail, prenez le temps d'aller vite. That is to say in English, go fast and take your time. So what I suggest for California is almost the same advertising for your next future HSR. Go fast and enjoy public transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. Our next speaker is Eda Beyazit. Eda is a PhD student at the Transport Studies Unit, School of Geography and Environment at the University of Oxford in the UK. In a PhD thesis, she's investigating the distributional effects of transport infrastructure investments and has worked on the case of Istanbul Metro under the supervision of Professor Bannister and Dr. Givoni. Her research interests include transport geographies, transport policy, social justice, and participatory urban planning policy. Eda's presentation today will take us through the UK perspective and explore the possible socio-economic impacts of the new UK line, high-speed line, named HS2, which is currently on the UK government's agenda and open to public consultation. Thank you, Eda.
Thank you, Schera. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for celebrating my birthday. Today, I'll be presenting a study by my supervisors, David Bannister and Moshe Givoni. Unfortunately, they're not here, so I'll be happy to answer your questions as much as I can. As we know, thanks for the introduction. So I'll be talking about the UK experience on high-speed rail. As we know, the context in the UK is much different than the one in California. We see the main difference is high-speed rail in the UK is not designed to provide a new transport option as an alternative mode choice, but to increase the rail capacity on the proposed rail corridor and thus to increase the attractiveness of an existing mode. So after a brief description of the current plans, I'll discuss the potential of accessibility and economic benefits of high-speed rails, and I'll focus on the ways to secure three critical elements of high-speed rail development, which are the number of stations, station location, and integration with the transport network. And I'll conclude with some concluding remarks. The UK has four main rail corridors, and only the one from London to east, the Channel Tunnel rail link to Europe, connecting Paris, is high speed, and it's called High Speed 1. The red line, West Coast Main Line, was recently upgraded to increase the capacity and reduce the travel time by using tilting train, not actually high-speed rail. The initial proposal for the high-speed 2 by Network Rail, which is the company in charge of rail infrastructure, for further high-speed train developments in the UK, came up with this single line going from south to north that includes spurs into major cities as Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. Some of our, like David's and Moshe's analysis, are based on this plan. But the further debates and pressure from cities, especially on the blue line, on the right, East Coast Main Line, resulted in changes into this Y-shaped network, which currently the government is consulting the public on. And the consultation is primarily on how and where to construct the line and or whether not to. And this new line is known as High Speed 2. The plan is first to build Birmingham Line, and later the lines to Manchester and Leeds, while the trains will continue to Scotland on the conventional train lines. We'll see these economic benefits later on, but just to give brief information, the cost will be £32 billion, and the benefit-cost ratio will be 2.6. Yes, and the speed, maximum speed is 225 miles per hour. As it was mentioned yesterday in one of the presentations, the time-space compression that the high-speed rails can create. In this map, we see the very well-known study of Spiekerman and Wegener, the potential of high-speed rails to shrink countries and continents. however, is only effective for those who are on the high-speed rail and who are well connected to the network. These are the cities that will benefit from high frequency of services. But it's not the same for the cities that are not on the network, that won't see the similar service patterns. So it might create connectivity for some cities, but disconnectivity for others. So as Peter Hall also suggested, high-speed rails may peripheralize what is already in the periphery, and even more, or as Graham and Marvin noted, they may create tunneling effects. Moreover, for those places that are not on the network, that the opposite effect is most likely. This is demonstrated in the estimated changes in travel time to London, an important indicator for potential economic gains from high-speed rail. For a selection of stations on the conventional network, if the original high-speed tube plan was implemented. This is a study by Hector Martinez and Moshe Givoni, and I've got the paper with me if you want to have a look at it or download it from TSU webpage. As you can see, the stations close to Birmingham Station that will be on the high-speed rail, the end line of the high-speed rail, the initial plan, the red dots will not experience any improvement, but the green dots on the north will have 30 minutes or more than a bit more than 30 minutes accessibility gain. But the analysis actually assumed the interchange between the conventional and high-speed rail lines at the same station, which is not the current plan. Thus, accessibility to London is overestimated in this analysis. In the UK case, the proposed line by Network Rail not only can expand the country for some locations, but also can turn the geography of the country upside down. This is another, actually this is in the same study, so you can see this map, but a different type of map. It is showing the rank changes in accessibility. So the green dots, which are on the north of Birmingham, will have better accessibility, whereas the red dots will have less accessibility. So it's kind of changing the geography of the country upside down. The places which are closer to London will be less accessible, but the places which are further will be more accessible. So changing the geography of a country, bringing farther places closer by travel time to the center than those geographically closer, must have significant socioeconomic effects as well as environmental implications. Here I'll present you the cost-benefit analysis of the Department for Transport in this, for the Y network plan. All numbers are in 2009 prices and in billion pounds, accounting for 60 years of operation. So the transport benefits are mainly for business users and amounts to 37.3 billion pounds. There are substantial benefits attributed to wider economic benefits, impacts, which are not part of the expected benefits of most transport projects. This would mainly come from the first part of the line built up to Birmingham. Furthermore, and surprisingly, these are not expected to be due to labor market effects, but due to agglomeration effects. So the overall benefits will account for 43.7 billion. The cost elements are mainly related to the capital cost, and overall, after accounting for the revenues generated, will require the government to invest or fund only 17.1 billion. This means that the benefit cost ratio is expected to be 2.6. It's a good investment by all means, but we have some reservations about the calculations made in this case. But high-speed train can be beneficial from a cost-benefit analysis perspective. Yet, an important, how am I doing with the time? Okay. Yet, an important question to address is how to secure such benefits, and equally important, how to spread them. This is actually showing the Y network, but I've got the DFT document with me, which also includes the West Coast main line linked, and when the main line is linked, then it drops to 2.0. But still, a good ratio. In simple economic terms, the number of stations is a function of trade-off between reducing the cost of accessing the station by opening an additional station, thus shortening the access journey, and the cost of adding a station, which is the cost of providing it and the cost penalty of stopping the train. So the characteristics of the high-speed train suggest it should have very low number of stops between the start and end stations. Why is it costly? Because the stations can be expensive or complicated, and stopping the train is costly, and improving access in opposition to that is cheaper and easier. This cost can be, however, reduced by integration of high-speed train with the rest of the transport system, and relatively seamless transfer between the access journey and the high-speed train journey at the station. Also, the strategic location of stations accounting for the existing and planned transport network, in particular the conventional rail network, airports, and the urban public transport networks are important in this location-making process. Generally speaking, there are two main models of station location, at the city center or outskirts. Each option has its own pros and cons, and the balance is always the context specific. The pros of one model are generally the cons of the other. So if you have a station in the city center, then it's obviously highly accessible. There is large potential for commercial and real estate redevelopment, but on the other side, it's costly, complicated, and often restricted by land redevelopment. If you have the station outside the city, then it's cheaper, simpler, better road accessibility, regional road accessibility, likely more land for redevelopment, reduced need to travel the route to serve the city, saves money and time, but also it is less accessible to city. In Birmingham, the second largest city in the UK, they opted for the best of both worlds, but for a city with that size, it's not clear that there is sufficient demand for both stations that are at risk of ending with the worst of both worlds. The city center is a spur from the main line, so not all the trains going north from London will stop here. So a high-cost link to the city center will provide the full level of service, will not provide the full level of service that London will enjoy. Airport station, depending on how many trains going from London will stop there, will have potentially much higher level of service, but much lower demand, because the Birmingham Airport is a relatively small airport, 9 million passengers in 2010 compared to Heathrow, which had 65 million passengers, and limited network of international connections as well. I'll talk about the integration with the rest of the transport network. So it's the main determinant of accessibility and thus the economic transport benefits. There are three levels of integration. We'll go through that with the urban transport network, the national intercity transport network, and the international long-distance air transport network. The first, in integration with the urban public transport, the attractiveness of using high-speed train with other modes depends on the ease to get to the station and the speed of doing so. As we see in another study, about 60% of rail passengers departing from Amsterdam choose Central Station, the yellow box, although there are 11 alternatives, often closer. This is due to the level of service at the station, and equally or more important is the ease of reach through the cycling network, bus, tram, and metro services. So the economic development around station, usually within 500 meter radius of the station, can be increased with integration with the rest of the transport network. So it's also essential to spread the benefits beyond the urban area to the wider region. That's one of the benefits of high-speed rails, actually. But there are risks in relying on regional access by road. If you get into your car, you might as well drive all the way to the airport, and also, more importantly, decide to leave it there. The proposed rail, Birmingham Station is a new end-of-the-line station separated from the current 2 stations, so it's not connected to the existing stations, which we argue that the map of the current rail network is missing from the high-speed 2 debate. The last issue is the integration with air transport, in this case Heathrow. The air rail integration, which we call integrated hub model, is hub and spoke operation, a new model of hub and spoke operation. In this model, rail can be used on spokes where currently there are flights offered, and also spokes where currently the aircraft is not serving. So a high-speed train station can substitute the runway if fast and seamless transfer from the aircraft to the train is sustained, and there is direct and high frequency of rail services to many destinations, and if the travel time is equal or not much slower than the flight. But in this case, the railway operator does not substitute the airline, it's the station substituting the runway, or the train substituting the aircrafts. Just to give some facts about the Heathrow Airport, that is the 2nd largest in the world by 2009 figures, and over 40 million non-transfer passengers from a rail, and from a rail perspective, it's actually the largest UK city, operating at full capacity with 2 runways, and the 3rd runway was rejected recently because of the air pollution limits, and it's not on the agenda at the moment. But flights can be substituted actually by high-speed train by about 20% of the runway capacity. Is a significant contributor to the UK economy and employment. But Heathrow lacks any rail connection to outside London, and Birmingham is the 2nd largest city in the UK, and now from Birmingham to the world is flying to Europe or driving to Heathrow. So the connection to the airport must be done, actually. Furthermore, this is, sorry, I'm just taking notes. So the current high-speed plans will unlikely to change much the station. As we look at the Heathrow in high-speed plans, because it's considered as the 2nd phase. It's not included in the 1st phase, and it's actually a spur or a loop. It's not a station on the line. So some of the trains will stop here, which are going to Birmingham. Some will not. It was considered that it was going to be costly because they said it's an addition of 2 billion and 2 minutes of travel time, but actually the cost of Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport was more than that. It was about 4.3 billion pounds. So to conclude, we can say that high-speed train can provide substantial accessibility benefits, which in turn might lead to economic development benefits. And these are likely to be specially concentrated around a low number of high-speed train stations, with many more other locations likely to disbenefit and see their relative accessibility reduced. To secure the potential benefits of high-speed train and to distribute them widely, high-speed train must be planned as the strategic backbone of the high-speed transport network. Its planning must be aligned with transport policy objective and fully integrated with the existing transport network. 2 final comments, so that we say the speed is not so important, but the main factor is the average speed, which takes us to the travel time, and thus high-speed train must be planned door to door, not station to station. Thank you.
Thank you, Eda. Our next speaker is Gabriel Alfeld. Gabriel is a lecturer in urban economics and land development at the Department of Geography and Environment in the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK. Gabriel joined the department in October 2009 and is heavily involved in teaching. Prior to that, he earned his PhD degree in economics from the University of Hamburg in Germany and worked as a research assistant for the Free University in Berlin. He's an affiliate of the Spatial Economics Research Center and an associate of the Center of Metropolitan Study in Berlin. His research concentrates on the effects of large transport projects and architectural development on local house prices, local political preferences, and urban structure. Today, Gabriel is going to take us to the economic development and regional integration of the high-speed rail system in Germany. Gabriel.
Thank you for this nice introduction. I suppose most of you are familiar with high-speed rail systems all over the world. So you see that's a German train. So this is some lessons to be learned from Germany. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a case study, so about one specific high-speed rail line that has already been developed and what has happened subsequently. It is the Frankfurt-Cologne high-speed rail line in Germany, and one special feature of this line is the connection of two smaller towns, Montabaur and Limburg, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in more detail later on. I know that's kind of unusual to start a presentation with all the limitations, actually, which you have in it. But as you heard, the UK, they're very enthusiastic about high-speed rail, as California is. And this study has been heavily used and I think misused to promote everything related to high-speed rail, and I don't think this is a fair interpretation. So I just want to highlight that what I'm doing here and what I'm presenting here is not a cost-benefit analysis. So we come from a slightly different background. We are very much interested into the benefits of accessibility. We don't have the ambition to look at the cost. So it's not possible to infer from what I'm showing here whether high-speed rail is a good thing or bad thing. Certainly, this is not a substitute for cost-benefit analysis, and most importantly, this is no statement to connect in favor of connection of economically marginal towns to high-speed rail tracks. So these are the limitations, but of course there are some important merits, which I think are worth being emphasized here. First of all, it's an important and interesting case study because we have unusually large accessibility shock, plus we have exogenous variation, which allows us to establish a causal relationship of high-speed rail on economic performance. We had a discussion here about that sometimes it's difficult to know whether high-speed rail is there because of economic success or the other way around. I argue here we can solve this problem. It's a complementary approach to cost-benefit analysis because we take into account agglomeration benefits. That is, we don't look at savings and travel time, but we also look at the potential for productivity to increase and the whole economic mass to increase because of economic agents that are now closer together and interact more heavily. And not least, I think one appealing feature of this approach is that you can do some predictions on the effects of high-speed rail or any other transport means in the future for different projects, not least for California. So regarding the motivation, I think there's not much point in telling this audience why research on high-speed rail is interesting. I think it might be interesting to just emphasize that we are establishing a direct connection of the presence of high-speed rail and economic performance. So we don't go the way around looking at passenger numbers like that. We just look, we have high-speed rail, and does this effect reflect somehow in GDP employment growth, or does it not? And yes, so before I show you the results of our analysis, I think it's probably helpful just to introduce the project. The line was inaugurated in 2002. It connects the two largest agglomerations in Germany. High speed, up to 300 kilometers per hour, does not seem that fast in first instance, but it is, I think, pretty unique if you look into the complex geography we have there, with a lot of mountains and things like that. Reductions in travel time are substantial. I mentioned that already, so by about 55%. So from Cologne to Frankfurt, instead of 133 minutes, it takes you now 59. So we really bring these cities close together. I think a fair question to ask is, so if these two agglomerations are so important, I mean, they're pretty large, not as large as the Bay Area and LA, but as large as you can get it in Germany, why hasn't this track been developed earlier? And in fact, actually, they tried. And they tried for quite a long time. So they tried to develop that track since the 1960s. So the decision to build it was made in 1969. But then it took 30 years of the negotiations, of discussions. We had NIMBYism, and then you have all these political games going on between federal states in Germany, which actually made this development take forever. And the interesting result of this whole negotiation process actually was that two really small towns called Limburg and Montabaur were connected to this high-speed rail line. And the reason is that the federal states basically just made a provision of track beds conditional on that connection. So they said, if you don't stop within our territories, we don't give you planning permission. That was heavily opposed by the rail carrier because these connections were not considered economically viable at all, but eventually they had to compromise on that just to make this track happen. Why is that interesting? It is interesting because in that case, we can say one thing for certain. So these cities, if they are economically successful, then this is because of high-speed rail, and certainly high-speed rail is not there because these cities are economically successful or important. So in terms of establishing a causal relationship, this is a very nice feature for our study, although, again, I don't say this is to be repeated in other settings. 40 minutes, less than 40 minutes, actually, now from these small towns to Cologne and Frankfurt, whereas earlier you probably need by far more than 1 hour. So this is really a rise from being peripheral to core. That's why we call the paper like that. Okay, so what happened in these cities? I mean, there is some anecdotal evidence in newspapers. They record a sort of economic miracle, new firms moving to these areas, new jobs being created, and eventually passenger numbers exceeding all expectations. And what we wanted to know is whether you can see this success story in the data. And if you want to do an exercise like that, at least with our approach, the first question to answer is, where do we expect effects to happen? So what we did is we ran a sort of transport decision model. It's not the most complex model in the world, but I think it's at this stage complex enough to show what we want to show. We connect all municipalities in the study area to each other. We're talking about thousands of municipalities. We have transport matrices before and after. Actually, high-speed rail was present. We calculate an accessibility index, which just reflects centrality of one region with respect to all other regions. We take the differences and then we get this nice treatment showing us where exactly economic effects should happen, where benefits of accessibility are largest. So obviously around these two small towns, Montabaur and Limburg, the black shaded areas, effects are largest. You can simplify this treatment a little bit just by looking on these towns if you want to. This is what we do. The most important thing is you not only have treatment areas, so areas where you get an accessibility benefit, but you have also some areas where nothing happened because they have other transport modes which are more important to bilateral connections. And whenever you have treatment areas, so an area where something happens, and you have a controlled area where nothing happens, then you can do this sort of recent natural experimental designs where you compare a treatment group to a control group over time, and you see actually how these areas relate to each other in terms of economic performance to isolate a treatment effect. That's what we do, and the second question which we ask is not where something should have happened, but given we know where it should have happened, when and did it happen? And what you see in these plots is actually what comes out of our treatment estimates. So we use a specification which is pretty flexible, so the data tells us how adjustments take place over time. We use different response variables. I just show a selection. But the picture is always kind of the same. So what you see here, based on GDP, we have a positive adjustment which takes place between 1998 and 2002. These are the 4 years preceding inauguration of the project. We have two different treatment indicators here. You see exactly the same picture. I can show you that if you use employment or you use GDP per capita, again, with different treatment indicators, you see the same sort of adjustment process. And in the paper, we have a lot more variables, and you will always see this pattern of adjustment is sort of the same. And we wouldn't be economists if we didn't develop a null hypothesis. And yes, you can reject the null hypothesis, so there is a significant effect. I want you to keep in mind two figures for a minute, which is this market excess elasticity of 0.2 to 0.3. I talk about that later on. What I just wanted to show you is, given that we had actually this effect isolated from the data, we of course did the checks whether we can explain this adjustment with any other factor which came into our mind. And so you have a number of attributes which we add here to our models, which explain and account for different characteristics of the area. And you see that actually this figure of 0.2 to 0.3 remains roughly the same. We do indigeneity checks, so we have instrumental variables to just use the exogenous proportion in excess. And again, we are within the same range. We do construction and substitution effects along the new and the old line. And again, we are within the same range. We do churning. This is a dynamic view into how industry structure changes. And again, we have this 0.2 to 0.3 effect. So I think to the best of our knowledge, I think it's actually fair to say that what we do see is a positive and pretty robust adjustment exactly where we expected it to happen. I think it's fair to say that it's unlikely to be explained by alternative explanations. And the last question we now want to ask is whether these adjustments actually remain persistent. So if you have a positive adjustment, then of course from an economic policy perspective, you want it to be sustainable in the sense that it doesn't disappear afterwards. I mean, suppose in the worst case, you just get some effects because of construction effects. You have people working on construction, and later on, once this is done, actually the effect disappears. So what we want to have is a shift in economic activity, which is permanent. And the very simple way actually of looking into that is simply by comparing growth rates during the adjustment period and afterwards. If there was something like a reversion of the growth effect, what I would expect would be a negative relationship. That is exactly where you had growth, you later on get negative growth. This pretty evidently from this plot actually is not the case. Instead, what we do see, we see that these areas with large dots, these are areas actually which got the largest benefit from high-speed rail. They are all on the right side of this panel. So this means they got an increase in growth exactly when high-speed rail was created. There's nothing like that actually for the after period. So what we can conclude from that picture is that we don't have reversion of these economic effects. So this is what I interpret as persistency. Slightly more sophisticated, you look into changes in growth rates. So the question we ask here is, do municipalities, after adjustment took place, return to the previous growth trends? And yes, indeed, actually, you see this negative relationship. They return pretty much to the growth path they had in advance. That is, if you got a positive shock, you go from your past to a higher level, but later on, you are at the same growth path as before. So this is, again, in economic terms, almost classic definition of persistency. And again, we have a number of null hypotheses, which you can derive from some statistical models, which are theoretically funded. I think all I want to say here is that the coefficients look exactly like what I told you based on the scatter plots. So yes, we can reject that these effects disappear over time. And yeah, that's basically actually what I wanted to tell you. Let me please take a minute to summarize what I want you to keep in mind from that presentation. So what we do is a case study on one, as I find, very interesting case study. Interesting because we have this element of exogenous variation, so this political element which just rejects us, allows for rejection in that the economic effects are driven by the economic success of the cities previously. So we have an exogenous lineup in the high-speed rail setting, which is not that usual. we found a positive market access elasticity. So that is, if you sum up access one region has to all other regions, potential business, trade partners, and so on, and if you increase that by, let's say, 10% because of a new transport infrastructure, then you can get, at least in that case, an increase in GDP by about 2.5%. These adjustments take in anticipation of the opening of the rail line, which is a kind of relatively usual finding in the transport economics literature, I think. We find that temporary adjustments lead to permanent shifts in levels, although not in trends. It's important to note that actually growth did not go on forever. We just shifted from one level to another. Nevertheless, I think if you compare that to other economic policies, I think it's probably fair to state that high-speed rail or any other transport infrastructure is more likely to yield to permanent regional redistributions than other policy measures. I'd like to add again that in principle with this approach we are developing, you can do predictions for future high-speed rail cases as in California. Of course, before we do that, we would like to estimate similar case studies for different settings to see how parameters behave. Also, we would like to improve a little bit on the model side, but in principle, actually, this case is suited actually to do predictions. And I think I've said enough on the limitations of the study, so that's basically about it, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel. Our last panelist this morning is Dr. Jean Morikami. Jean is a postdoctoral researcher in the University of California Transportation Center and in the Institute of Urban and Regional Development at the University of Berkeley. His research interests are in the transportation, investment and spatial planning, infrastructure finance, economic development, and urban economics. In particular, he focuses on the dynamic interrelationships between rail transit investments, transit-oriented developments, and urban regeneration phenomena in the context of global capitalism and local entrepreneurism. Jean is now presenting the economic aspects of the high-speed rail project in California through a comparison with Japan. Jean?
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to join such a great international case session. And I am a research fellow working for the University of California Transport Center. So as local attendant, expected to focus on the economic impact of California high-speed railway. But I a little bit hated to represent California's future transportation view, because I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan. So many of you in this room know more about California's economic geography, democracy, maybe. So for today, I decided to compare Japanese Shinkansen and the California high-speed rail system. And then I'm going to make a public policy implication to California. So this is impact, maybe. First of all, just briefly mention the backgrounds about California high-speed railway. So according to existing public-private non-profit research, in California, there are several regional poles and high-potential intercity travel markets to justify high-speed railway projects. In fact, California is the largest beneficiary to receive federal contribution. Also, California residents authorized the state general obligation bond for the California high-speed railway project in 2008. Proponents claim it will generate a wide range of downstream benefits. For example, California high-speed railway authority currently predict project will create a large number of construction and permanent jobs over the next 25 years. On the other hand, many analysts have questioned the net downstream economic benefit. One might argue that public spending in railway system is likely to generate smaller accessibility improvement and economic advantage as linkage between transportation and the land use pattern has diminished. Indeed, existing study condemned that economic impact of contemporary railway investment tend to be spatially redistributed within one city region, and also highly localized in high access hub-node places. Yet, there remains question about the economic impact in the United States because there is a lack of experience with high-speed railway system in the United States. Again, there is no high-speed railway system in the United States. Our study, therefore, attempt to prove the economic benefit question by examining recent market profile in the proposed high-speed railway station area. Our particular focus are, first, the spatial distribution of economic activity across different types of cities. Second, physical coordination of transportation, transit-oriented development, regional airport terminals, and local feeder services. And third, financial application of value capture techniques. Again, there is no high-speed railway system in the United States. So we recent market profile in California are internationally compared to those around the Japanese Tokaido Shinkansen line. Tokaido Shinkansen line provides a pretty good analogy in terms of service distance between two core cities, also speed and travel time. But one large difference is density. The job and labor markets around the Shinkansen station are about 3 to 4 times denser than those around the California high-speed railway station. Given these backgrounds, Shinkansen line's actual ridership level is about 2 to 4 times higher than California's estimated ridership level. This is a pretty big difference. This study actually assumed that the economic development impact of high-speed railway are very localized in station catchment areas. Yet there is no clear territorial definition of high-speed railway station catchment area. So we set up 5-kilometer radius buffers from each stations because high-speed railway project is likely to encompass larger radius than the usually assumed 500-meter radius. And second, the exact location of many high-speed railway stations in California is still uncertain. The final station location are very likely to shift more than 500-meter buffer. And first of all, I illustrate the job and labor distribution patterns over the corridor and location shift across the 26 California high-speed railway station from north to south. Then upper chart presents that in 2008, San Francisco, Los Angeles are the largest job center, followed by some edge cities in Southern California. Notably, these edge cities are quite larger than the traditional secondary cities, such as Sacramento, San Jose in Northern California. Then lower chart further describes that between 2002 and 2008, San Francisco, Los Angeles, edge cities in Southern California gained more jobs and workers. But the station area in Northern California have lost jobs and number of jobs during the same period. In the same way, I illustrate job and worker distribution patterns and location shift across the 17 Shinkansen stations from west to east. So these bar charts more clearly present that job markets are highly polarized around the major terminal station only, such as Tokyo, Shinagawa, Nagoya, Kyoto, and Shin Osaka. Next, I further look at the industrial composition changes around the high-speed railway station between 2002 and 2008. Now, our cluster analysis statistically identify 8 types of job market across the 26 high-speed railway stations in 2002. And another cluster analysis also identify 8 types of job market in 2008. There are several composition changes during this period. However, I would like to just emphasize 3 key market reconfiguration. First, San Francisco and Los Angeles are reclassified as finance plus business service hubs more clearly. And second, 5 HCT stations are re-agglomerated not only industrial, but also business service center. Third, very unique knowledge and service-based clusters are formed, particularly in Southern California, such as information, leisure service, and education plus business service. So then, similarly, our cluster analysis constructed 7 types of job market in Japan, but this is not without case, but with Shinkansen case. With Tokaido Shinkansen line, first, Tokyo and Shinagawa shaped dominant financial, information, business service center. And second, Shin Osaka, Nagoya sustained secondary knowledge and service-based job centers. And third, other intermediate stations are classified as either mixed sub-region business center or industrial centers. So from this empirical comparison, I would like to extract 4 key points. First, the new high-speed railway system is likely to induce knowledge, service-based agglomeration benefit in major hub cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, if there are aggressive entrepreneurial state promotion. In the case of Japanese high-speed Japanese Shinkansen, neoliberal government in 2001 set up a range of urban regeneration incentives and public space requirement around the major terminal stations, and massive commercial development package were delivered through public-private partnership. This entrepreneurial practice actually generated considerable land value premium around the Tokyo station. According to my latest economic price analysis, there were more than 35% commercial land value increase in 5 meters of the Tokyo station before and after joint development projects. Second point I'd like to make is that the new high-speed railway project can shape time-sensitive manufacturing and service-based business cluster in 8 cities, accompanied by regional airport development plans and local transit feeder services. Ontario Airport in Los Angeles and Shin-Yokohama in Tokyo are 2 of the good examples. And my third point is that new high-speed railway might be able to promote regional tourism and local leisure service industry by enhancing high-quality urban design and unique social capital development. For example, Anaheim could be an attractive leisure destination from here, but current proposed station site is quite unpleasant, surrounded by massive freeway facilities. So in the case of Japan, Japanese Shinkansen, the new Kyoto station was very carefully designed and harmonized into the social urban context. And my last but most arguable, debatable point is that the new high-speed railway is likely to generate large economic benefit to major cities and some edge cities at the expense of small intermediate cities without any regional supports and local efforts. The station area will be dominated by automobile parking lots that intend to gain more passengers. Nevertheless, I argue that such an auto-dependent land use plan would encourage neither transit ridership nor economic development. In conclusion, the economic impact high-speed railway would be geographically redistributive, but these redistribution effects need not to be zero-sum game. The location shift, guided by proactive public policies, would improve economic productivity and social creativity around high-speed railway station. So it should have some net benefit to the state of California at large. To sum up, I would like to re-emphasize the importance of geographic strategies and funding program in maximizing California's economic benefit along with high-speed railway projects. More specifically, California high-speed railway should be intended to shape multiple knowledge service-based business centers. Such labor-intensive business need high-quality labor inputs. So TOD, transit feeder services, should be promoted as community strategies. Of course, all of these capital projects are generally very expensive, so innovative finance is essential. I think around the high-speed rail business centers, there will be a greater joint development value capture opportunity in coming years and decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any more questions? Thank you. Before I look at this one, I've tried to look at the questions and try to group them in different sets. There are first questions coming to the price of the tickets and the income and the people who are able to buy tickets for high-speed rail. Here are a few questions. What are the prices and frequencies of high-speed rail versus air between major city pairs? In particular, do you have deep discount fares like those we have in California, referring to prices that we have in France? California incomes are somewhat higher than those in France and in the UK, so can you comment on the income strata who will use the train? And if the users have so much of the gain and are the winners, as Yves said, what can it be captured in the ticket price? Just as an introduction on this topic, I would like to remind you what was said by one of the panelists yesterday. You need to keep in mind that in Europe, most of the railways are state-owned, and they always deal with this dilemma of offering a public service and, on the other hand, making money and being profitable. So with the legacy of the public service, we have in France on high-speed rail, and if we're taking a city pair like Paris to Marseille that Yves mentioned in his presentation, which is a 3-hour trip, we have prices starting at 25 euros, going up to probably like more than 100 euros for business for the business travelers. So what we try to achieve in France is definitely to have a very deep range of prices, and just make sure that it's accessible to all. And we play with the revenue management like airlines do in order to push people to anticipate the trip, and they will have access to cheap prices if they anticipate as much as possible the trip. And when you get closer to the travel date, you tend to have the expensive price tickets. But Yves, do you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, just two comments. The first one about the competition between air system and high-speed rail, the competition between the mode. If we come back to the example of the Eurotunnel, the tunnel under the channel between France and Great Britain, it was very interesting that the traffic, the freight traffic was not as high as expected because the competition, because of the competition between the rail traffic and the ferry traffic. Because the boat manager were able to reduce the price, and then the trucks stay on the boats, on the ferries, and not on the train. So it's clear that you can have competition between air traffic and train traffic. And one of the explanations of the success of high-speed rail in France is that we have the yield management, as explained by Schera. That is to say, for the same trip, you can pay between Lyon and Paris either 25 euros or 80 euros according to the dates you book your ticket. So it's clear that if you have no yield management, if you have a flat ticket, a flat price, it's more difficult to compete with air traffic. So it is the first explanation.
It's a conjunction of anticipation of the purchase and also the flexibility you're looking at in the tickets. So if you want to buy a flexible ticket, which is a business ticket, you're going to pay much more than fully non-refundable or non-exchangeable tickets, for sure.
And about the fact that because of the big size of the time gains, it's possible to increase the price, it's clear. But it's partly a zero-sum game. When we opened the new line between Lyon and Paris, the gain was more than 1 hour before and after the opening, and the price of the ticket was the same, exactly the same, even if the gain was more than 1 hour between Paris and Lyon. So the benefit was very high for the users. And when we opened the line between Lyon, Paris, and Strasbourg in 2007, the gain was more than 1 hour, and immediately SNCF increases the price of 20 euros per trip. That is to say, SNCF attracted a lot of the surplus because it's clear that due to the fact that the gain is so high and the trains was full, so it's possible to attract money. No, so obviously, when we open a new system, we are obliged to start with a low price. And then, as soon as you increase the size of the network, the attractiveness of the system, you can attract more money. It is the case today.
Thank you, Yves. Another set of questions is more linked into the differences that were maybe presented to you in the different presentations today. So there are one stating, do you anticipate that the California high-speed rail project will have similar economic characteristics to France? What will be similar and what will be different? Yesterday, Peter Calthorpe said that high-speed rail causes growth and job. If the French model applies to California, why aren't supporters paying attention to Professor Crozet research, which says otherwise? I'm not sure he's completely saying otherwise, but he will tell us. And also for Gabrielle, how do you explain the difference in your findings about the local GDP impacts of the new high-speed rail stations between the presentation that we had with Yves and Gabrielle's presentation? Do you want to start on that, Yves? Or?
Yes. Just an explanation. I am convinced that high-speed train was a very, very good thing for France, and I am sure that it's a good thing for California. It's obvious. But I am a compulsory user of high-speed train in France. I make more than 40,000 miles per year in high-speed train in France. So, but in the same time, I have another part of my brain where I am an economist. And it's not necessary to promise some mistakes and to say that we will have big impacts to be convinced about the utility of high-speed train. About the impact, I totally agree with what Peter Kaltorp presented yesterday. But he didn't say that we will have plenty of jobs due to high-speed train. He explained that due to high-speed train, you have a leverage to change the growth in order to avoid the urban sprawl. And it is the main topic of that. But about jobs, it's clear that high-speed train is so small in comparison with the world GDP of California that it's impossible to promise more jobs only because of high-speed train. You can have more jobs in this place. And if we compare the methodology with Germany, what we did is to compare, is to say, okay, we look at the French regions. We have 23 regions in metropolitan France. And what are the regions with the highest GDP growth during the last 15 years? The highest GDP growth during the last 15 years in France was in Corsica. Corsica is an island. There is no train, no high-speed train. And it is the highest. And the second highest GDP growth, it's in Toulouse. And in Toulouse, there is no high-speed train because it is the southwest part of France. So we have, up to now, no high-speed train, or almost no high-speed train. But you have the Airbus industry in Toulouse, and then you have a very big economic dynamism. So I recall that first we have economic growth. And because of economic growth, you need transport system. There was another question about China. It's not because they have high-speed train in China that they have economic growth. They have economic growth in China because they transfer workers from the poor productivity sector in agricultural to the high productivity level in industry. It's mainly because of that. It's not because of neither from TGV nor from airport or motorway. It's because of economic growth. And then not necessary to promise some structuring effects of transport. Thanks to the well-known job of Robert Fogel, the Nobel Prize. If you remove the train in the US during the 19th, you have almost the same growth. So don't think about the structuring effect of transport. Transport is a very small part of the GDP. What is important is GDP growth, and then to adopt the best transport system. And I am sure that because of the map you have in the geography you have in California, I am sure that high-speed rail is really a good idea for you.
Thank you, Yves. Going back to Gabriel's presentation, there is a question on intermediate stops and what's the percentage of high-speed trains between Frankfurt and Cologne stopping at intermediate stations? And do you have a sense of how the economic benefits would increase and decrease based on this percentage? Not easy one, but... another one, which is more on the message that high-speed rail will generate jobs and economic jobs. So according to Gabriel and Yves' presentation, how can we maybe reform or rephrase that? And I think Yves addressed that a bit, but saying that giving you a message that also there may be temporary economic boost, high-speed rail will not be the driver of economic boom. No, it's not a driver, it's accompany the economic growth. But
yeah, thank you for these questions. I think I should first of all go back maybe to the first question, this mismatch between what Yves and I presented. I think, first of all, actually, it's a pretty normal thing that if you ask two academics on the same thing, you will get 3 responses at least. So normally, if you ask me, I have to offer two responses. So I think what do we learn out of this sort of riddle that I do present some sort of pretty robust evidence on GDP growth, but in many other cases we don't see that. This is a preliminary answer to the problem because this is not entirely well researched, but I think it goes into the direction that actually we have two things going on around high-speed rail. So if you build a high-speed rail line, one thing that happens is that you simply reduce travel time for a lot of people who are using high-speed rail. That's the sort of consumer surplus thing, so this is what is normally entered into the cost-benefit analysis. But I think there is another dimension which hasn't been looked at so closely in the past, and which is more related to the idea of agglomeration economies. So what are agglomeration economies? That's basically what Paul Krugman actually got his Nobel Prize for in 2008, and what beforehand Jane Jacobs and many other researchers have thought of. The idea that if you bring people closer together, reductions of transport cost and actually these spillovers, knowledge spillovers, information spillovers will eventually lead to an increase in productivity of input factors of workers. So if you believe that is the case, then, and you bring people closer together, and actually there's a lot of research believing that it's all about clustering, then you should see these productivity gains. And I think, addressing this issue of creating jobs, if you don't want to flip one job from one place to another, but you want to create a new job, the question is, where should these jobs come from? So the natural answer to that is, if you want to have more jobs, you need to make your input factors more productive. And one way, actually, of doing that is by improving information and knowledge flows, and one way of doing that is by high-speed rail. The thing to get a bit closer to the bottom line where I want to go, I think, however, there is a threshold actually where these information and communication spillovers take place. So if you look into economic geography research, you will normally find that the largest degree of spatial interactions that happen on a daily basis, they happen within a very localized area, either in terms of distance or travel time, and that's basically just the same thing. So my take on this is that if you use high-speed rail, as in the case of Montabaur and Limburg, to suddenly bring cities within the range of these sort of daily interactions which actually drive productivity, you get an increase in the total economic mass of the whole system. So we're talking actually about distances here of 35 minutes from Limburg and Montabaur to either Cologne or Frankfurt. So this is something actually where you don't only get travel time savings, but in addition you probably get some sort of productivity gains which then reflect into a net growth of employment, which what we detect. So obviously if you go into another set into another rail setting where you don't have these, where you don't cross this threshold where these interactions start to begin, then you don't get these productivity gains. This is not to argue that it's necessarily a good thing to go down that route. So this relates to another question we just got here, which actually just asked what would have happened if we just disconnected Montabaur and Limburg from that rail line. And I should add that actually I think, to my knowledge, basically every train which runs from Cologne to Frankfurt stops at least in one of these two very close by cities. So what happened if you just take them off the line? So here we get a trade-off. On the one hand, what I think would happen is you would actually cut off some sort of day-to-day business interactions, so this would have a productivity effect, you would lose some jobs. On the other hand, you would increase a lot the consumer surplus of those who are using the rail line. So you would save a couple of minutes, which you add up over millions of users, which equate to quite a substantial economic wealth. So it's all about a trade-off. There's no clear and good and right answer to the problem. You can, on the one hand, actually, with these small stops, create economic growth. This is probably what we find. Or you create a huge consumer surplus, which can easily outweigh these productivity effects, which is probably what Yves is referring to in his analysis. So I think that might be actually a way to understand the discrepancies between our studies, and I think I have answered the other questions as well with that answer. Yeah? Thank you.
I think it says it, yeah. On the UK side, we have a question about Birmingham Airport and trying to find out if the airport will survive a successful high-speed rail project, and how does it help to the problem at Heathrow to push more traffic into it. Especially we think that people want more people use it if they can get to it easily.
Thank you. First of all, with better connection to Birmingham Airport through high-speed rail, it can take the some short-haul flights or long-haul flights from the Heathrow Airport, actually, so it can take the weight of the Heathrow Airport to Birmingham. So if we're talking about the economic survival of the Birmingham Airport, that would create more economic benefits for the airport itself, but also the better connectivity with the rest of the, let's say, if the project goes up to north to Scotland and also Leeds and Manchester, so it will connect these cities with Birmingham Airport, which will make the airport more accessible and more useful. And in the case of Heathrow, we know that, is it the connectivity of the Heathrow Airport again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why pushing more customers to?
Yeah. So we know that if you don't have good connections to the airport, in the UK case actually, like a lot of people drive to the airport, and so it's creating quite a lot of environmental impacts, and it's not actually pushing more passengers to Heathrow Airport, but also like sharing the capacity of Heathrow Airport with the transport rail network. According to a study, I forgot to mention that, according to a study of, again, Eda Beyazit and Moshe Givoni, in Heathrow Airport, there were, in 2003, 190 destinations the airport served at that time. 10 of those destinations could be served by high-speed train with no severe time penalties. And these routes actually consume 20% of the runway capacity in Heathrow. So the runway capacity is actually full in Heathrow Airport at the moment. So a high-speed rail connection would help to ease this problem and take most of the passengers going through Heathrow to Europe and other parts of the world through high-speed rails. That would that answer the question? Or?
Yeah. There is another question actually regarding Heathrow, which is more a practical one. But will luggage from air flights be automatically transferred to rail travel? As you probably know, it could be the case when you don't have to clear customs. I'm sure you're used to it when you travel abroad. If you take the US example, when you have to clear customs coming from an international flight, you need to pick up your luggage and you have a drop-off line after the clearance of customs. So that could be the case as well as in all the airports in the world. As far as you plan for the infrastructure to be in place for that. So it's probably more difficult to plan today because it was not done properly in the past. But if you want to definitely have a very efficient system and efficient complementary modes between air and rail, that's something you need to plan. The only one which is, I think, doing it well today, as far as I know, is Disney. And I'm sure you all much more aware of me than that. But Disney is the only one capable today because they have agreements with customs to clear basically the luggage as soon as the luggage are getting out of the plane, and basically driving to a safe area in the airport, which is the case in Miami and I assume as well in LA. And after they deliver luggage in the hotels in the Disney park. But you have things which are already explored, and especially in the UK, for example, when you take the Heathrow Express to link the city centre of London to the airport, you have airlines which are at the station on the Heathrow Express, and you can already register your luggage at the airline booth in the station of the Heathrow Express in London. So you don't have to bother with your luggage once you are at the airport in Heathrow. Hope that answers the question. Final question. There is one for Eda and Yves again. Since only user of the system benefits, is it correct to condense the map geographically? And what does the map look like for low-income individuals or non-users?
Low-income people are not in high-speed train. It's clear, or sometimes perhaps once per year. And about the map, the idea is it's impossible to create in the same time all the network. You have to start with one line. And obviously, you have to choose the most profitable with the most important traffic line. And then, according to the urban hierarchy, you have the design of the network. And in some places, for instance, I don't know if it's possible to come back to my presentation with a map of France, because I can show you on the map of France where it's not necessary to have high-speed train, because the traffic is so low that it's not possible to have a high-speed train, because to obtain the minimum of profitability, for instance, between Lyon and Paris, you have 23 return trips per day, and the same between Paris and Nantes. But if you open a line between Paris and Clermont-Ferrand, and only with Paris-Clermont-Ferrand, it's not possible, due to the size of the city, to have the number of trains in order to have enough profitability. So it's clear that you give the map of a country to a geographer and the size of the city, and with a gravity model, you have the map of the relevant network.
Yeah, just to comment on the presentation, what the maps can present actually, the maps can also present individual travel preferences, but of course with an intensive study. In this case, the maps that I showed are presenting the accessibility of stations to the high-speed rail network. In the case of the conventional networks are connected to the high-speed rail networks with a seamless transfer, but that actually in turn affects the connectivity, affects the accessibility of the whole system. So it does affect individual travel preferences. But in the case of low-income users, actually, yeah, I would have the same answer. But we can have a look at the what would they benefit actually from the high-speed rail. So then we come to the wider economic benefits and also environmental benefits of high-speed rails. So as Gabrielle mentioned, like the study of Paul Krugman or Roger Wickerman and Dan Graham, we learned from them that high-speed rail and other transport systems can create labor markets and agglomeration benefits. And also with the reduction in the driving actually to the airports or like to the stations, then the non-users will also benefit a lot from the environmental changes. So that's what I would say for the non-user benefits as well.
I come back because you have the map here. Just to understand the limits of the French high-speed train model. You have just here, you have the line between Marseille and Nice. At the beginning, the project was coming from Paris. The idea was to have a direct line from here to Nice with a bypass close to Marseille, in order to be able to go from Paris to Nice in 3 hours or a little more. And it's because it is the most important air traffic in France is between Paris and Nice. It was the first project. And then there was a huge debate in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region. At the end of the debate, they decided that the line will be a line just crossing Nice, and then Toulon, and then Grasse and Cannes, and then stop with a stop in Marseille, and it's dead-end station, so you stop and then you go back, and then you go to Paris. In that case, it's no more relevant to compare with the plane. So it's no more the same high-speed train model. It is no more the French model. It is the German model. Because you stop every 80 kilometers or every 100 kilometers. In that case, you don't need 300 kilometers per hour. It's no more the same system. You don't need a new line on all the system and so on. And it is why when you have only a map, very often you make a mistake. Because it's not the same train system between Paris and Lyon, long distance, high speed, and between Marseille and Nice. And for instance, almost nobody in France knows that if we want to have a high-speed train between Nice and Marseille on the model decided in the debates, it's no more the French model. We need the help of German system.
Thank you. There is one more question on the Ninbai issue, and it's going to be the subject of the next panel, so stay tuned, and thank you very much.